Hey there, what's going on everyone, and welcome back to the Bimmer barn. Today we're going to be resuming progress on this E60 550i restoration, and specifically we're going to be servicing the transmission and all the related seals because we want to make sure that this thing does not fail catastrophically, leaving us stranded on the side of the road. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into the video. Now, I've seen a lot of E60s for sale on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace having a bad transmission, and I think it's because people forget to service them. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing today. We have fresh fluid to be installing, a fresh filter, and then all the related seals for the Mechatronics unit and the sleeve for the harness as well. So everything that we should need to make sure this thing is running tip top. And the first step is going to be going to the car and just draining it out. So like I said, we're going to start by removing the transmission drain plug, and while we're here underneath the car, I also realized that it looks like it might have been serviced before. There's a pretty nice leak coming from the transmission harness connector, and we'll find out later why I think this seal was serviced before but not replaced with a new part. Now, once the transmission is fully drained, I like to reinstall the drain plug, and that way it's not dripping on us while we're trying to remove the pan itself. Now, this is going to be a T40 bolt all the way around, so we're going to go ahead and zip it off with our impact gun, and that way we can go ahead and get the pan loose. Mine was a little bit stuck onto the transmission, but with a pry bar and a little bit of encouragement, we were able to get it off. Now, to remove the Mechatronics unit, they're going to be these T40 bolts, and they have a different head than the rest of the bolts on the Mechatronics unit that actually hold it together itself. So you definitely want to be careful not to remove the wrong bolts. And on mine, there were a total of 13 to remove, but if you had an earlier model transmission, there were only 10 bolts to remove the Mechatronics unit and get it out of the transmission. Now, I'll flash a picture of the tightening sequence here so that way you can see the different bolt patterns, but I'll go ahead and put this at the end of the video as well when we do get to torquing down the Mechatronics unit. Now, before we can remove the Mechatronics unit, we actually have to remove the harness connector that goes into the transmission. So I'm going to go ahead and use a pry bar here. That makes it pretty simple to get it out of the way. And then we need to pull down on the white locking tab in order to release this sealing sleeve so that we can remove it from the transmission, and that will allow us to remove the Mechatronics unit. The problem is though, once I removed this sealing sleeve, I realized I couldn't get it out. I literally it couldn't squeeze through the transmission in the tunnel here. So that's when I realized that we had to remove the exhaust. So that's what I did here, remove the heat shields and the exhaust system, and that way we could tilt down the transmission and get a lot better access to everything that we're going to be servicing today. Now, I use this method a lot when servicing transmissions, and it lets you tilt the transmission back enough to get access to a lot of things, but because the drive shaft and the motor mounts are still connected, it's really not going to move back that far. So as you can see, this sealing sleeve was clearly used before and reused with some black RTV or silicone sealant. So it's a good thing that we have a new one to replace before, and now we can finally get to removing the Mechatronics unit. Now, the reason that we remove the Mechatronics unit is because it has a few seals underneath it that transfer the fluid between the transmission gears and all that, and also the valve body, which is inside the Mechatronics unit. And what can happen is that when these seals deteriorate over time, you start to lose pressure inside the transmission, and then you can start to get fault codes and a bad transmission. So while I have already replaced the bigger seal, these smaller 4 ones right here, I actually bought the wrong seals. So I'll go ahead and rectify that and put the correct part numbers to these in the description below for those of you guys that want to replace them. But today, since mine looked like they weren't that bad, I'm just going to go ahead and reinstall them and we'll just make do. Now the other thing I wanted to show you is the gear shift lever, and you want to make sure to get that thing aligned properly when you get the Mechatronics unit in place. And so once we do have that all lined up, we're going to go ahead and reinstall all the bolts, and then we're going to follow the tightening sequence and get them all torqued down to 11 Newton meters. Now once you've got all the transmission pan bolts snugged down, those get torqued down to 12 Newton meters, and then we're going to be good to go ahead and start the fill procedure. And in order to do that, we want the transmission to be level. So we're going to go ahead and lift that thing up and get the transmission mount mounted up, and then we can start on getting our exhaust installed. But unfortunately, when we were removing the exhaust, we actually broke a stud. So now we're gonna go ahead and have to take a little side quest and remove this stud so we can go ahead and install our exhaust the right way. Now I usually start off with a hammer to see if a stud wants to come out pretty easily. This one did not at all want to budge. So that's when I knew I would have to step it up a notch, and that's when we got the air hammer out. It also did not want to budge for that. So we went ahead and went to our worst case scenario, and that's when you go ahead and drill out the stud. So I went and cut off the end of it with a Dremel, and we had to tap the rest of it off. And then you see here that I have a set of cobalt drill bits, and I'll put a link to these in the description below as well. These are really good for going into really hardened steel like what these bolts and studs are made out of. So we're gonna go ahead and just start with a small pilot hole and just get it bigger and bigger, one bit at a time, until it's big enough that hopefully we can just punch the stud out. So let's go ahead and get to work, and we'll have this thing out in no time. So now with that broken stud out of the way, we can reinstall the exhaust system and resume our transmission service. Remember, we want to go ahead and start the car up now so that we can get the transmission to temperature and resume the filling procedure. And we also have to go through the gears as well. So kind of an interesting procedure. You want to make sure to follow this really well, and that way you don't have any issues with getting as much fluid in your transmission as possible. Now the transmission fluid comes in these single 1-liter containers, which can kind of make them a pain to fill, but fortunately we have this tool from Schwaben, and I'll put a link to this one below. It's actually a multifunction tool, so not only can you do brake bleeding procedures with this, but you can also do like fill procedures like we're about to do. So we're gonna go ahead and fill this thing up with about 3 liters of the transmission fluid, and that way we can go underneath the car and just simply force it into the transmission using this little nozzle and hose. And it's a really affordable kit for what it does in the garage, so I'd really recommend that you guys check it out if you don't have one of these yet. Now the only way to fill this thing up and know when it's full is to basically overfill it to the point where it's leaking out of the side from the fill plug. So that's what we did here, was we filled it up as much as possible, and then we're gonna go ahead and start up the engine in a well ventilated area so that we can get the transmission up to temperature. And while it's circulating, while the engine's running, it's going to go ahead and take that fluid and put it into the torque converter, put it into the clutch packs of the transmission, and it's going to need more fluid. So that's why we're going to go ahead and get back under the car, and once it's at temperature, we should try to get it nice and filled up, and then we're going to start going through the gears inside the car. So this is something that you want to do to make sure that there's no air bubbles caught anywhere. You want to run through reverse, neutral, park, and drive, maybe as many gears as you can. Although you don't want to go too fast if your car is up in the air, because you don't want to risk it, you know, coming off of your jack or slipping or anything like that. So once you've done that and you've gone through all the gears and just made sure the transmission's operating correctly, it's alright if you get a couple of fault codes, because obviously when the car is in the air and the front wheels aren't spinning but the rear wheels are, it's going to throw some ABS faults. But anyways, once you've done all that, you want to go ahead and just pull that fill plug off one more time. Make sure that it's still topped off, it doesn't need any more fluid, and then you want to go ahead and torque that baby down, reinstall all your covers and such, and then you're gonna be all done, folks. Job complete. So that's going to conclude our video for today, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching. Definitely have some paper towels nearby in case you're going to be doing this job, because it can get pretty messy with that transmission fluid. So I'll have part numbers for everything that we use down in the description below in case you guys want to check it out and do this on your E60, 545, or 550i. And if you enjoy BMW tutorials or you enjoy building cars like this, be sure to check out our channel and subscribe if you're new and you haven't yet, or leave a comment down below and a like if you enjoyed the video. As always, I hope everyone has an amazing day, and we will see you next time.